Hey guys, it's Goosebumps Completionist, and today I'm bringing you another TV show episode review from the classic 90s Goosebumps TV show we all know and love. And this episode comes from Season 1, and it is called Return of the Mummy. Yes, I have a sealed DVD copy. I found a rip of the episode since Netflix took most of the show off streaming. I found it on YouTube, so if I don't have to open a DVD, I'm not going to, and keep it sealed for my collection. But yeah, Return of the Mummy from Season 1. This one is a common known one to be one of the bad episodes of the show. In my opinion, it's not quite bad, but it's also not good. And we'll get into that near the end of the video. But this episode, right, it's a doozy. This episode is just a hot mess in a lot of regards. It was directed by John Bell, and it was written by Charles Laser. Now, one thing off the bat, I think this episode is trying to improve on the book a little bit, and I can see that in the writing by Charles Laser here in the adaptation. But this is one of those episodes that I think is held back by the presentation of it. And, you know, it's kind of hard comparing episodes to books sometimes because books just don't have that visual medium that episodes have, right? But just because books don't have that dimension doesn't mean that when we're comparing the two that we just remove the visual dimension out of it or the performance dimension out of it. I think it plays a heavy role in how the episodes are taken in. And for me, I think this is almost atrocious in some regards, and we'll get into that. But yeah, do I recommend this one off the bat? Not really. But if you're a fan of the original TV show, or maybe you like the Mummy books, or you like mummies in general, this might do it for you. But anyway, let's get into the plot overview without giving too much away. So Return of the Mummy, like I said, is trying to change the book a little bit. And you notice that pretty much off the bat, and you're introduced to Gabe. Now, Gabe is played by Daniel DeSanto, who you might know as Tucker from Are You Afraid of the Dark? He was part of the Midnight Society. And there, in that show, he's not terrible at all. He's actually kind of entertaining. But here, almost immediately, I don't know if it's the ADR, I don't know if it's maybe just the, vociferation of his voice, but he is annoying. It's like nails on a chalkboard annoying. And I've mentioned this in the past about Benjamin Plenner. You might recognize him in a few episodes. These two actors are some of the worst actors in the show. Definitely top 5. Yeah, Daniel really takes down Gabe almost immediately. It's pretty much hit the ground running annoying. But Gabe is inside of the pyramid, as opposed to the book, where the book starts off with him on an airplane, and he's going over the events of Curse of the Mummy's Tomb. Here, since the show did not adapt Curse of the Mummy's Tomb, it tries to ignore that, that whole part. And Gabe's in a pyramid, and he's talking about being on an adventure with his cousin Sari and his uncle Ben, and how they're touring a pyramid, and how they're very close to discovering this old tomb of this prince named Koru that they just so happen to know pretty early on, as opposed to the book. And Gabe is told by his cousin and his uncle that they're going to go explore some parts. He just got there, I think that's implied, or he's been there maybe just a little while. And they're now finally ready to go tour the pyramid. And Gabe, he has his flashlight, he has his camera, and he's ready to go exploring. And he kind of gets, left behind a little bit. His cousin and his uncle are kind of antsy to get into there, but Gabe is kind of, reserved and apprehensive. And his cousin Sari kind of makes fun of him about it, like, oh, you're kind of a scaredy cat. And he's like, no, I'm not. But, it is what it is. Gabe does have this reserved side to him. So as they're, they enter this cavern, and, Gabe kind of shows you off the bat how he's kind of afraid. And they end up in this room, and he thinks there's this cool, drawing on the wall, and he thought it would be cool to take a picture of his uncle and his cousin. And before he does that, there's a mentioning of the summoner that he had brought with him. And this summoner he bought from the airport, which is a little bit different from the book. And Sari's like, that thing is not real. But Gabe, he's like, you know what? I think it's cool. And his uncle makes a comment talking about snake oil salesmen from the Cairo airport and how they might be like selling them, selling them, I don't know, blinker fluid, if you know what that is. It's just a scam, essentially. But Gabe, he's holding on to it. He thinks he's cool, right? So when he's about to take the picture, he sits down as summoner. And as he's taking the picture, he keeps getting distracted, but he snaps it, and, they're ready to go on, so they head off without him. And Gabe tries to pick up a summoner, but he can't find it. And he sees that they've already gone, into this area of the pyramid without him, so he feels like he has to find a summoner real quick. And he sees that it's crawled in the sand. And it's shown in the episode that the summoner is crawling, and something might be actually supernatural with it. And he's like, well, that's weird, and he puts it back in his pocket. And he heads down into this area, and his cousin and his uncle can't be found. And this is big old room in this pyramid. And I think I really want to applaud the set design here, because it really feels like a pyramid cavern. I mean, it looks tremendous. I mean, hats off, really. Great job. And Gabe's lost in this. He's calling Sari's name, calling Uncle Ben. They're not responding. And he is essentially lost now. So he has to try to find them. So he ends up wandering around, getting kind of spooked with Daniel DeSanto's screaming involved and shouting names. And he ends up, wandering around. Eventually he falls into a cavern below. He falls through the floor. And he lands in the bottom of this room that's full of sand. And he loses his summoner. But he grabs his flashlight, looks around the room, and he sees this seal. And he's like, oh, well, this must be where the tomb is. And while he's examining the seal, he looks at the eyes of it, and there's a jump scare with the cobra, and it scares him a little bit. And when he realizes that, maybe this thing was in his imagination, Sari and Uncle Ben have lowered a rope down to him and tell him to climb up, and he climbs up. And after talking, they realize that Gabe might have actually found the tomb of Prince Koru. So later on, there's a time jump a little bit, where Uncle Ben's congratulating Gabe for finding it, finding the tomb of Prince Koru. They seem to be in their tent or wherever they're staying, and they're looking over some books. And Sari's over in the corner, being kind of a sourpuss about Gabe's discovery, trying to undermine him. But Gabe's like, I think it's cool. I did this, even though I did it by accident. I'm going to be involved with this major discovery. And while they're celebrating, this woman comes up, and she reveals herself to be this woman named Neela. And Neela says that she's a writer, and she's heard a scoop about this discovery that potentially could be happening. And she seems to have some background knowledge about hieroglyphics and how to read it. She's looking at some pictures that Gabe has taken, and notices a sign in one of the pictures, and she points it out to him, that pretty much say, the inscriptions mean that he wants to rest in peace. That's what these hieroglyphics are saying. And Uncle Ben seems to be smitten with her and caught off guard because he doesn't know her. But when she says that she wants to cover the story, he's like, you know what? That's cool. You can come with us. And then you kind of meet this concierge guy holding her bags. And he seems to think that this place is cursed and doesn't want to be involved with it. So he heads and skedaddles. And eventually they end up at where Gabe saw the symbol with the cobra that he thought he saw. And they chisel it off, and they head into this room, which ends up being a false crypt. And while in the false crypt, they're mentioning something that Neela brought up earlier about this chant, that if you say it 3 times, compared to the book, which was 5 times, it could bring Prince Koru to life. And Sari sees that Gabe is kind of, nervous, and tries to play up on that, I guess because she thinks that Gabe stole some thunder from her, and tries to get him to say it, and like peer pressures him into saying this, and he reluctantly says it after she says it twice, and something off kind of happens, right? And Gabe seems kind of nervous even more now, but he looks over in the wall and thinks he sees a summoner, and the summoner kind of gives him some hope, and he's like, okay, well, let me go grab my summoner. And when he's trying to grab it, something grabs his wrist, and he's screaming for help. And it's hysterical because Daniel DeSanto's screaming is awful. And he's screaming his full head off. Sari comes and tries to help, and pretty much calls Uncle Ben to come help. And when Uncle Ben's coming, he's like trying to hurry over. There's a false door in the wall, and the door knocks Uncle Ben unconscious. And Sari and Gabe are left on the other side of this wall in pitch black, and they feel like they're trapped. And there's an iconic scene pretty much as soon as they're in the wall of realizing that they're trapped, and Gabe looks over at the skeleton and screams bloody murder. Like off the top of his lungs, Daniel DeSanto is screaming like a mad lunatic. And it's hilarious. It's one of the funniest things in the entire Goosebumps show I've ever seen. What a legendary meme moment of the show, if I ever saw one. It's hilarious. Well, Gabe and Sari are still stuck, right? And I didn't bring this thing up yet, but after Gabe discovered this, room where the location where the tomb is, he was given a pendant with amber, right? And it has a bug inside of it. And Neela, after we meet Neela, she also has a pendant made of amber without a bug inside of it, right? So, Gabe is like rubbing his pendant, and he gets this vibe that down the, there could be something this way in this room. So they keep following where they think the tomb leads to, and they end up discovering Prince Koru's actual tomb, and it's filled with gold and treasure. And they're like, well, good thing we found the treasure, but we're going to be skeletons before we can ever enjoy it. And they're kind of down on their luck and think that they're going to be goners, right? And they see this mummy box, and they try to go observe the mummy box. And Sari wants to open it, and of course, Gabe and Sari open it, but surprise, there's no Prince Koru inside. And they think back to that chant, and maybe, just maybe, Prince Koru might be alive in that tomb with them. And there's a whole climax involving potentially Prince Koru coming to life, and the kids get really freaked out, and they try to go hide. And then there's a plot twist dealing with one of the characters of the story, revealing themselves to be a potential relative of Prince Koru. And this is where it gets kind of hammy and kind of rushed, kind of very similar to the book, where this whole thing happens with the character that we know trying to get, something to happen to Sari and Gabe. I don't want to spoil it, but let's just say there's an accident that happens that takes care of this character. And after the accident, Gabe sees an opportunity to try to get out with Sari, and there's an interaction potentially with whatever's in the tomb with them. And Gabe comes up with this idea, because he got his summoner back, that maybe if he does something with the summoner, it will take care of whatever's in the tomb with them. And it may or may not do so. And they end up reuniting with Uncle Ben eventually, and all seems well. And then the ending kind of wraps up with Gabe trying to go, pack up his stuff and get back on a plane to go back to America. And there's a cliffhanger. And I'll just leave it at that. And that's essentially Return of the Mummy, right? So let's get off with some positives. I do have some positives with this. My first main positive, I guess, is the atmosphere in the set itself. I think was fantastically done. I mean, I really want to praise, because when I was in high school, I did production for like theater and stuff, and I dabbled in it in college as well. And I have to say, as somebody who's like a nerd on that stuff, what they did here for this set was fantastic. It really felt like a pyramid, given the budget they had. It probably was done on a shoestring, but they pulled off what they could, and it looked great for what it was. It really did. I really got the sense I was inside of a pyramid, and that's immersion at its finest. Great job. Another compliment I want to give it is the plot. The plot seems more streamlined than the actual book. I think this was a valiant effort by Charles Laser to cut out a lot of the filler the book had. Especially like the first 4 chapters with Gabe being on a plane, going over the backstory of Curse of the Mummy's tomb, essentially up until he gets into Cairo and leaves the airport. All of that is just straight up filler. Or padding to, make the book over 100 pages. Here, streamlining the episode down to a 22-minute episode is a perfect length for this story. I mean, nothing more, nothing less for this. I think the plot works better. I even think the changes they made here with some aesthetic things, making the summoner more important to the story than the book was, right? The book, I think the pendant mattered more, and I think to some extent the episode still involves the pendant a little bit, but the summoner aspect being connected to the mummy inside of it is an ingenious change. I like that, and I like the change with the summoner having kind of like a mind of its own that was not prevalent in the book. So, yeah, I like that. And I like the look of the mummy. I think Prince Koru looks scary. I think he looks intimidating. Even though it's the same mummy costume that Don't Wake Mummy would later reuse, it looks fantastic. Prince Koru looks great. He looks scary. If I would have saw this episode as a kid, and I don't think I did, but if I would have been scared. Genuinely. So yeah, and the costumes look great too on the other characters that had costumes. It looked believable, right? But the negatives, now we're getting to some negatives, and it's essentially down to Daniel DeSanto, right? Daniel DeSanto is my biggest drawback with this episode. His acting, to me, is atrocious. Some of the worst acting. Up there with Larry Boyd's actor from My Harry's Adventure. Up there with Benjamin Plenner. There's some bad acting in this show. But this was just over the top. And even though he's not the only thing over the top about this episode, I feel like it's just he brings this ambiance to it where you just cannot take anything seriously. It comes off hokier than most mummy stories already inherently do. Most mummy stories deal with, archaeologists or Egyptologists going to a pyramid. They see an inscription, they disobey the inscription, they go against local legend and do it anyway because they don't believe in it. And of course the mummy comes to life and all this death happens. It's the same old. And it feels hokey, right? Here, it feels hammy. And sometimes ham can be good, but ham and hokey put together often is not a good thing. When you got a hokey plot and then a hammy performance, it comes off ridiculous. And that's how I feel about Gabe. Gabe is annoying. Sorry, her character here feels like a downgrade from the book as well. I think there was a more emotional connection with her character for me in the book, right? And I kind of want to say what I allowed about her character for the book versus episode video, but she comes off annoying, and she just feels like a whatever character. And then Neela, her character, how she's brought in is almost just as sudden as the book, but it feels really thrown in there. You know, I think the 22-minute crunch is a good thing, but I feel like they could have taken away some exploring bits dealing with Daniel DeSanto screaming and scream talking, and could have just made Neela's introduction a little more organic, kind of built on the ending compared to the book. And now we're getting into some similar sins that the book has. It's a rushed climax. It's rushed both ways here. And I feel like it doesn't improve the area that makes the story what it is. It just does the same sin. And it essentially has all of them minus the filler the book had. It's predictable. It's, you know, by the numbers. Except there's a little more creativity. And I'll give it this. There's a little more creativity with the summoner. And it's not as a big negative as the book. But it's still there, right? So when you have an episode that has pretty much all but a few of the same sins as the book, minus the filler and improving the plot, that can only take those so much, because where the story ends and goes is also equally important, and I just feel like it doesn't wow me at all, just like the book. If it wasn't for the acting, I'm just going to put it up front, if it wasn't for the acting, I'll be willing to give this episode a C, and the treatment of some characters, making them feel like downgrades and stuff. But those get pretty much tacked on and tank it down to like D tier territory for me. So from a 0 to 5 star basis, with all my issues, it's pretty much the same, pretty much all the same issues from the book minus the filler. It cuts out the filler. I think it improves the plot, adds a cool thing with the summoner here. So it trades that, right? But the acting and the downgrading of the characters and pretty much expediting the climax, making it even more rushed coming off, right? And the ending, I guess I'll bring up the ending as a negative too. I totally forgot about this. At least in the context of the episode, there's something that happens to Gabe's summoner, and in the ending twist, it involves said summoner, and it makes no sense how it came back. Makes no sense. And I'll just leave it at that. So, you know, it's a D tier episode. I don't quite think it's bad like most people do. I think it's a not good, not bad episode. So it's going to be between a 3 to a 3.4. But where I settled with it, I gave it about a 3.1 out of 5. And it's a low D, pushing that D minus territory below a 3 out of 5. But a 3.1 out of 5 is completely fair for this, I feel. It's just a very flawed episode. Yeah. So, that's my thoughts on Return of the Mummies episode. Let me know down in the comment section down below. Do you love this? Do you hate this? I'm dying to know. And I'll see you next time.